Honourable Senators, I see that we do have the quorum and I declare the meeting in session. Avec le quorum, la séance est maintenant ouverte.
With the quorum, the meeting is open.
Senators, as well as the viewers across the country, Canada, who are watching us on sendcanada.ca. Maintenant, j'aimerais demander à...
Now, I would like to ask each of you honourable senators to introduce yourselves. I am Percy Muckler, Senator from New Brunswick and Chair of the Senate Committee on National Finance. Now, I would like to ask each one of you, dear colleagues, to introduce yourselves, starting from my left. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Senator Forêt from Quebec, and I would like to welcome our former colleague, Senator Art Eggleton.
From New Brunswick. Joan Kingston, New Brunswick.
Jane McAdam, Prince Edward Island.
Pierre Dalphon, Division de Delormier au Québec, and I welcome also our former colleagues, which I briefly met for a few months when I came in.
Bonsoir, Clément Gignac, Québec.
Welcome, Senator Tony Lofreda, Montreal, Quebec.
Bernadette Clément, Ontario. Bienvenue.
Kim Pate, welcome, and I live here in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe.
Elizabeth Marshall, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Larry Smith, Quebec.
Thank you. Honourable Senators, I see that there's a senator that raised her hand, and she would like to, I'll give her the opportunity to listen to what she will present to us, and then I will ask the committee to take a vote on it. So on this, Senator Pate, la parole est à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
All of the colleagues who reached out to me yesterday, it became very clear that there's an interest in doing a more fulsome study than we have been able to do up until this point. So given our due diligence, and of course I have great enthusiasm for this proposal, I wish to propose the following motion. Notwithstanding the motion passed yesterday, I move that we defer clause-by-clause consideration of Bill S-233 so that the committee can exercise our due diligence and hear from other witnesses.
So thank you, Senator Pate. Any comments or any questions from the senators? If not, I will ask if it is adopted. Agreed? Is it agreed and adopted? Thank you. Honourable Senators, today we begin our study of Bill S-233, an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income, which was referred to this committee on April 18, 2023 by the Senate of Canada. Avec nous, nous avons...
We welcome today the Honourable Art Eggleton, former Senator.
Senate and of all senators when he sat here in the Senate of Canada. Mr. Eggleton, thank you very much for saying yes to this important order of reference, and we are, without a doubt, awaiting your comments, and then it'll be followed questions from the senators. And also from the City of Victoria, Mayor Marianne Alto by video conference. And to you, Madam Mayor, do you hear us? Do you hear me? We don't hear you. Will please bear with me for a couple of seconds?
It's fine. She's tested it.
Okay. Would you say, do you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, you hear us. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you for accepting our invitation. So we'll start by opening remarks from Honourable Art Eggleton, followed by the Mayor Alto. So at this point in time, I will recognize for comments our former colleague, Senator Art Eggleton. Senator, la parole est à vous.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you for inviting me back. I spent many years
sitting on committees of the Senate, including this one, but I never really sat at this end of the table. I never sat in the hot seat, but please have mercy on me tonight. But I am glad to have this opportunity to come in support of Bill S-233, an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable income. As a former member of the Senate and chair of the Social Affairs Committee, where I spent a lot of my years, and a one-time member of this committee, as I pointed out, I have been an advocate for social justice issues, particularly the reduction of poverty, but have always kept in mind the need to do that in a financially responsible way. And to further emphasize that, I would remind you that I was summoned to this committee many times. I was once the president of the Treasury Board between 1993 and 1996, so I appreciate those needs of fiscal responsibility. Now, one of my great privileges as a senator was to work across the aisle with our colleague, the late Honourable Hugh Segal. The two of us worked to help produce a report in 2009 titled In From the Margins, A Call to Action on Poverty, Housing, and Homelessness. And amongst its recommendations was one to pursue the possibility of a basic income based on a negative income tax system. Our purpose was not a universal system of demo grants, but to top up people to give them a chance to escape poverty. Hugh used the phrase, and I quote, "Give them the boots so that they can pull themselves up by the bootstraps." Neither Hugh nor I would support a system that was beyond the fiscal capacity of government. We both saw it as a plan for people to escape poverty, reduce income inequality. Because for these people, our fellow citizens, every day is a battle with insufficient income, unaffordable housing, inadequate clothing, and a scarcity of nutritious food. It takes a toll on their lives with a loss of dignity, marginalization, stress, and anxiety. Our current social assistance and welfare systems frequently trap people in poverty. The systems are a patchwork quilt of humility for so many people. Incremental improvements are not enough. What happens is sometimes one government will come in and say, okay, we're going to put some more money into this pot to help these people of low income. And the next government comes along and says, well, it's time for restraint. So it's a step forward, a step back. Incrementalism doesn't really solve the problem. Or as Hugh Segal used to say, our present system doesn't fight poverty, it institutionalizes it. And it costs us all billions and billions of tax dollars every year. There are savings that can be made here, not only in administration, but in the impact of such costs as health care, shelters for the homeless, and public safety resources. The Canadian Medical Association once said, quote, "Poverty makes us sick," pointing out that the lowest income quartile has twice the health care costs than the highest income quartile. And homelessness costs us 3 to 4 times higher by leaving someone on the street than giving them housing with supports. Also, it isn't just those on social assistance who suffer, but many of the working poor can't make ends meet, even with more than one job. The working poor are substantial users of our food banks, and food banks, as we're seeing in the media day by day, are growing in need, and many of them are, in fact, people already that have jobs but just don't have enough to make ends meet. Giving people a better foundation, this is what it's all about. Giving them a better floor, a better foundation to meet their basic needs will reduce those costs and give them an opportunity to build a better life for themselves and their family. And some of the many pilot projects in Canada and around the world have demonstrated people can become contributors to rather than dependents of the public purse. Now there's another savings. There's where go from withdrawing to contributing. Now that's a good investment, and it's a good return on the investment. As you know, there are many estimates on the cost of basic income for the federal and provincial governments. It all depends on the design of the program. There are obviously some that are far too expensive, that don't meet the needs, go beyond what we are attempting to do to get people out of poverty, get them back on their feet, get them into productivity in our society. Well, that's why a framework as recommended in S-233 is needed. As part of that collaboration with the government of Prince Edward Island, who have expressed interest, or any other willing province, it would help to demonstrate what is a workable solution in real life. While there will be transitional costs as you change from system to system, I believe that overall, in the long run, a guaranteed livable basic income will not require more money, but will put us on a path to spending smarter, more efficiently, and effectively. It's time to end poverty and reduce inequality in this rich country we're blessed to live in. It's time to improve equality of opportunity and better sharing of our prosperity. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Senator Eggleton. Now to the Mayor of Victoria. Madame Mayor, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely great.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's a real privilege to be joining you this evening. I was in Ottawa earlier this morning, actually, and rushed back to my home to be able to join you. It's a real, as I say, a privilege to join you on this important topic. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this dialogue. I'm speaking with you here tonight from the traditional and contemporary lands and waters of the Lekwungen people, the reservations of the Songhees and Esquimalt, on which the city of Victoria sits in its entirety. Tonight, I'll be speaking with you tonight on 4 ideas. First, the importance of a guaranteed basic income, which I'll periodically refer to as a GBI, how we might pay for a national program by transferring some program funds, the potential role of local governments in delivering a guaranteed basic income, and how a basic income affects community safety and well-being. First of all, a simple guaranteed basic income is just one component of a community's comprehensive economic, health, and social well-being. It's a manifestation of our collective compassion, of our commitment to treating and serving all of our residents with fairness and dignity. Canadians struggling to meet basic needs every day cannot fully participate in our society, and that is our loss. A guaranteed basic income creates opportunities for individuals with limited incomes to access and contribute to community programs and services from which they are otherwise barred because they lack financial capacity. So a GBI enables a greater degree of social and civic inclusion. Secondly, addressing income insecurity at a national scale at its source would save resources currently spent on reactive measures. For example, as the Senator previously mentioned, estimates have suggested that investments in a GBI could lead to an 8.5% reduction in emergency hospitalizations, which today could mean a savings of over $5 billion. Similar projections have been made for police, courts, and prison costs. I would argue that our society would be healthier and individuals could do their jobs better and thus be able to contribute to local economies through increased capacity to produce and purchase local goods. Recognizing the broad and local benefits of a national program, let me just turn for a minute to what my and other local governments might do on a smaller scale. So third, local governments are uniquely positioned to assess the need for and deliver a targeted GBI. We already plan and deliver services on which our residents rely, and such services are planned in response to ongoing assessment of local conditions like population demographics, housing availability and affordability, local cost of living realities, and all of the other life challenges that face all of our residents. Applying this same menu of assessment tools would allow local governments to tailor a GBI to the real residents in our communities in response to their real circumstances. To enable local governments to deliver local GBIs, all orders of government must engage in talks about a new fiscal framework that redistributes tax dollars to recognize the increasing share of responsibilities being embraced by local governments. But that is a conversation for another day. Fourth and finally, a GBI would have an enormous positive impact on our community's safety and well-being. Right now, Victoria is in the middle of a mayor's initiative reimagining how community safety and well-being is defined and what it is and can be in real practical terms. A significant aspect of our current community engagement is exposing my residents' anxiety about their financial security and their inability to respond to the rising costs of housing, food, healthcare, and the daily goods on which we all depend and which many of us take for granted. Those anxieties contribute to insecurities and fear, which play a demonstrable role in the breakdown of civil society, which undermines perceived and real community well-being and safety. When the city's community safety and well-being strategy is considered by our city council in September, some model of a basic income will be a component. The potential impact on community well-being of a simple, easy-to-navigate guaranteed income program was inadvertently demonstrated after the COVID-19 pandemic, when the federal government implemented income support initiatives like CERB and wage subsidy measures, which resulted in notable drops in poverty-related statistics. It was also one of the most positively viewed government programs in recent years, and recent data compiled by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternative noted that over 80% of recipients rated that program as thumbs up in a very positive way. Recipients described CERB as a source of stability and financial certainty when other parts of their lives were in chaos. It helped them deal with social and economic stress, care better for their loved ones, plan for adjusted or new employment, and allowed many to routinely take care of their basic needs. Adapting the best aspects of CERB to a GBI would help alleviate the damaging effects of poverty and facilitate access to financial security, improve health, employment, and education outcomes, and reduce stress levels. And as individuals' quality of life is improved by a GBI, so is the well-being of their and my and your communities. In conclusion, a GBI could provide just enough income to lift people gently out of poverty, reduce anxiety and fear, and increase the reality of and belief in local community well-being. Being sure that a person or a family's basic needs can be met means that these folk can take a moment to breathe and to think and to participate in community building because they don't need to spend every second of every day worrying about feeding their children or whether or not they can pay their rent. This makes our residents, my residents, your residents, full participants and contributors to all of our cities. I urge the Senate to facilitate the implementation of a national guaranteed basic income program through your support of Bill S-233, and until that is in place, to support local governments' forays into a provision of a similar program. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Honourable Senators, before we move to questions, I would like to recognize, j'aimerais de reconnaître un nouveau...
A new member of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Dalphond. Senator Dalphond, thank you for having chosen the National Finance Committee. I have no doubt that you will be an important addition for the future of our discussions.
Honourable Senators, for 5 minutes for the first round. Senator Marshall, the floor is yours to être suivi par le sénateur Forêt et le sénateur Gignac.
Followed by Senators Forêt and Senator Gignac.
Chair, and welcome back, Senator Eggleton. It's nice to see you again. And also greetings to you, Mayor Alto. Thank you for being here this evening. So my question, we've had a lot of witnesses up here before us on this bill, and most of them are in support of a basic income, but there's no data there. It seemed like the most comprehensive data that's available came from a witness, Mr. David Green, who's a professor. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he chaired an expert panel on basic income in British Columbia, and they issued a comprehensive report, and they actually recommended against implementing a basic income or conducting a basic income pilot. So my question is, like, why is there such a lack of information there to support a basic income? Because there have been a number of pilots conducted over the years, or partial pilots, but there's no data there like that would support it compared to what was produced by Mr. Green out in British Columbia. So can you just speak to that? Would you be able to speak to that? I'd be very interested in hearing why just no, the lack of data?
Well, I would beg to differ. There is a lot of data. It's true that some of the pilots have not gone on long as were needed to give a very complete set. The MinCom, for example, in Manitoba, or even the Ontario one, when there was a change of government, they stopped. But there is tons of anecdotal information.
Hard data.
Well, there is some hard data in it, but there is a lot of, you have to accumulate it from
Somebody
the
has
very,
to-
very
yeah, it's
different
not accumulated.
studies. There are a lot of different studies that have brought a lot of data. A lot of universities in this country have done a lot of work, very detailed work out of Queen's University, out of the University of Manitoba. They would all beg to differ in terms of how to translate the information that they've been able to put together into it being good, hard data. Now, that's also why, though, understanding your question, why we need a framework so that we can determine what is the best direction to go in this, to be able to serve people's needs, but be able to have the kind of data that we need to be able to accomplish it. So it's a step-by-step process, and I think it starts with building this framework. And there is a lot of information out there that can be of great value, and if it's necessary to do more pilot to get more data, then do it. But don't. I mean, the anecdotal stuff is very compelling, and I don't think we can just drop it just because you don't think we have enough hard data. Let's get the hard data.
But when Mr. Green appeared, I mean, they have a comprehensive report, and he was able to speak to it in like a broad perspective. But when you speak to other people who participated in pilots, or even like former Premier Wynne, you don't get the feeling that it's been wrapped up in a it's not all in one place. So it would seem to me that for people who are supporting a basic income a project, that the data would be available and presented in a convincing manner. But I find that the more convincing data is actually in what Mr. Green provided. So it's just. And I should mention that, I spent 3 years as a Deputy Minister of Social Services, so I'm very familiar with all the financial assistance programs. But on one hand, you got a lot of really good information, not supporting it, and then over here it seems like you don't have the same quality of data.
Well, I think there is a lot of basic information. I've seen stories where people have been able to use a pilot project and have got back on their feet, have moved forward, have got better jobs, start to be contributors to society in that respect, as well as to their own lives. Those stories are very compelling, and there are lots of them out there. So that's a good start.
So do I have time to hear from Mayor Alto, or will I wait till second round?
Second round, Senator, please. Second round?
Yeah.
Okay.
Senator, I would like to respond to that at some point if I have an opportunity.
Okay, well, why don't do it now? Why do it now, Madam Mayor?
Okay.
I'll recognize you though for 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just Senator Marshall, thank you for the question. Just a couple of quick things. I think the British Columbia report, which you cite, actually has to be situated in the context of the present government's priorities. There are so many incredibly dramatic and very aggressive priorities this government has put forward around housing and supports and a variety of other social services that this particular way forward has not been a priority for them. It is not likely to be on a provincial scale in the near future, partially because there is a provincial election looming, but also because there's been such an aggressive suite of other actions intended to be supportive of folks who are impoverished and struggling. But the second thing, I think, just on the data question, the pilots that have taken place here in British Columbia have accumulated data, though in a very short time. And what I would suggest also is that, as I mentioned in my remarks, the sort of inadvertent data that came forward as a result of the various income support programs that emerged out of COVID point dramatically to how those sometimes very minor assortments of different funding made incredible differences to people's capacity to be able to change the way they live when they were so close to being impoverished. So I think there are actually living examples within some of those programs that we would only need to accumulate with a little bit of effort to be able to provide exactly the data you need, which I completely agree needs to be accumulated.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sénateur Forêt, pour être suivi du sénateur Gignac.
Senator Forêt, then Senator Gignac, and then Senator Stick. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Eggleton, for a very interesting presentation. Yes, we can easily see that the gap is getting larger and larger between people who are in a fragile situation and those who are have enough. So I know that everything is complex in the federation, and given the shared responsibility between the federal and provincial governments in terms of tax credits and social, how can we ensure a guaranteed livable income in the context of the Canadian Federation?
Consultation between the federal government and the provincial governments, and we at least have one province that's indicated it's quite willing to do that. And I think I think we've got a lot to sort out in terms of where you start, how you set up the system, the framework that this bill calls for, and that's what we ought to get them to start doing. The main aim here is to get people out of poverty, get them up to a better position so that they can then move forward with their lives. And we've seen in a lot of the pilot projects where that has worked quite well. And I think at the end of the day, it'll pay dividends. It'll reduce healthcare costs. It'll reduce costs in the criminal justice system. It'll reduce costs in terms of administration, the kind of administration that goes on now with welfare, the social assistance programs that are humiliating in many respects for people. So there is a lot of cost savings, and there is, as people get on their feet, ability to be able to move forward with their lives and to become contributors. So I think it's a good investment, but they've got to sit down and obviously work out the parameters of it. There's so many different studies that have been done, and with different conclusions, that's all got to be sorted out, and that's where we need to start.
My comment or question for Ms. Alto.
On that
just very
question?
briefly, very briefly, I think that's an incredibly important puzzle for us to solve. There's no real way that we can do a national program until we have full consultation with all of the provinces and territories. But I would also urge the senators to consider the utility of including the municipalities as well, partially because we have the ability to actually do the work on the ground and provide you with some of the data and the examples that I think can be knitted together across the country to show all of the provinces and all of our leaders how it can get done.
Une autre question.
Another question for Ms. Alto. Ms. Alto, I worked in the municipal field for 27 years. I was a mayor, so I understand your situation. So my great concern, it's a major issue in Quebec, is that currently municipal taxation relies on real estate tax. So for a long time, the municipality has been assuming a more important role on the social level. And that's where the municipalities have problems with homelessness and housing. In where you are, does that same thing exist, where the majority of your income comes from property taxes, which deals with buildings and not people?
Thank you for the question. You're correct. The majority, more than 60% of our income as a municipality comes from property taxes. The rest comes from a variety of different agreements, services, and permits. So we do have a huge challenge, as I mentioned in my remarks, as we continue to take on more and more of what have been traditionally primarily provincial, but also some federal programs as well. We as a community here in Victoria, and I don't think we're alone actually, certainly in British Columbia, have been for some years, as I'm sure is probably true across the country, somewhat reluctant and a bit angry, actually, at how much downloading, as we call it, has happened. But I think there's a real turn that is happening, and certainly my reference to our city's community safety and well-being plan is part of this. It's very much a realization that cities have now evolved and are evolving into much more compelling and much more directly service-oriented governance structures. And I think there's a real movement for us to, rather than resist that, actually to embrace it. And in that conversation, to then be able to look to our residents to say, how much are you willing to spend in order for us to deliver these services to all of our residents, whether they're housed or unhoused, or whether they're impoverished or wealthy? They are all our residents, and we need to treat them with equity and with a certain degree, an absolute certain degree of fairness. That is what I referenced earlier about the more national conversation about having the degree of interaction around what is a new fiscal framework. But I have no illusions that that's coming soon. So when it happens in some years, I hope when I'm still in office, that's great. But meanwhile, we do have to take responsibility as municipal governors to find the money however we can in order to serve all of our people. If that's property taxes, then that's my responsibility as a mayor to persuade my residents that this is worth it, because I believe it is. And I believe they will too, with the proper information.
Thank you, Madame Mayor. Non, prochaine ronde, s'il vous plaît. Sénateur Gignac, to be followed by Senator Smith and then Senator Ross. Sénateur Gignac, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I also want to welcome our witness. There's no doubt that Canada, and I share what you said at the beginning, that at first sight, the introduction of a guaranteed minimal income would improve the situation, even though in Canada, if we compare ourselves to other countries, our neighbors especially, there's less of a gap between rich people and poor people. But from a study in 2021 by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, it seems it's not for certain that all categories would benefit from guaranteed basic income. For couples, it's fine, but a single parent with 2 children would actually find themselves in a worse off than they are currently because of the elimination of exemptions and the various tax credits that exist. And that situation varies from province to province. In some provinces, a single parent family with 2 children would lose a lot more than others. So my question is the following, and this is the PBO who was mentioning this. Do you agree with his conclusions? And how could we deal with this, given that the bill could be higher if we want no one to lose in a reform?
Are different aspects to the design that he looked at, that the PBO looked at, than what others have looked at. I don't think that anybody in a lower moderate income should be reduced in terms of their support. I think we have a progressive tax system, and we've got to treat people in a way that they're not going to be worse off. And there are other designs that could be employed. One of the designs, for example, I think he did employ was the treating even young people as an individual who are still at home, whose parents may not qualify. He or she may be part of a household that in fact has sufficient funds, although the individual may not, being a student perhaps, or somebody in a low-income job. Well, I think you have to look at the household income. And if you do that, then that would be a considerable savings over and above what I think the PBO were looking at in that case. Also, I found, at least in the first study of the PBO, which was just out before I left the Senate, there was not a reduction in the provincial contributions to social assistance. I mean, you take that into consideration, and then you have a different picture altogether. So it depends on how the design is done, and that's what needs a lot more attention. I'm not saying that the PBO was wrong in coming to the conclusion they did, but it was based on the input that they used for it to produce the output. So there just needs to be a better formula.
Senator Gignac.
Ma seconde question, parce que
So it's an interesting question because there's the PBO, and in Quebec, we know that we have a very progressive society. In 2017, there was an independent committee of experts who looked at this issue and rejected the concept of a guaranteed minimum income guaranteed. So we have all these social programs in Quebec, the daycare.
and I'm concerned about the fact that this expert has mentioned, basically, not recommend. Ma question maintenant est sur l'incitatif au travail.
My question is on incentives to work. The PBO and others say that this would have an effect on encouraging people to incentives to work when we have a strong, high immigration to compensate for our labor shortages. So to go ahead at a time when we have problems with labor, would that create a disincentive to work?
One area where I think there are some hard data statistics that come out of these various studies, not just in Canada but in other parts of the world, where there has not been a substantial diminishing of workforce attachment as a result of the implementation of basic income. We have a strong work ethic in this country. And people, I don't think, are going to be satisfied to just get enough to get by, to get their basic necessities, because I think the kind of plan that we'll end up with will not give people by itself the good life. It'll make sure they have the basic necessities and a little bit of room to maneuver, to get out of debt, to get more education, more training, whatever, to be able to move themselves on to a better life. I think that's what people want, and that's I think one of the great benefits of having this is they want to be able to get ahead of life and to get out of the situation that they are so miserable in.
Thank you, Mr. Eggleton. Mayor, do you have any comments on those? Can you add on the two questions asked by Senator Gignac?
Just to the first one, actually, actually on both, but briefly on the first one, I think that the question that's posed that I'm not going to comment on the parliamentary budget officer's piece. Obviously, that's beyond my purview. But I think that the notion that you are now considering a framework actually answers the question that was posed. Your framework has to be a living document. It has to be a document that is reflective of what the changes may be as society itself evolves. If you're going to create a framework, it can't be static. It can't assume that everything that we want to look at and consider right now is all that there will ever be. And so it has to be built in a way which allows there to be adaptability and evolution to be able to consider exactly the issues that I think are behind the question, insofar as being able to recognize that there will be different ways that different people actually respond to the concept of a basic income. And where there are situations where perhaps there is evidence that it's being overused or perhaps used inappropriately, there need to be consequences for that. But I agree with Senator Eggleton's comments in that I think we have a very strong work ethic in this country, and those issues would be the exception rather than the rule. So this, for me, is you're debating a framework that has to be evolutionary and living.
Thank you, Mayor. Senator Smith to be followed by Senator Ross and then Senator Pate. Senator Smith, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Eggleton. In 2020, you co-authored with the former late Senator Hugh Segal in support of a national basic income program. You were hopeful that the patchwork of COVID-19 support programs would provide many lessons learned in the design of a more permanent income security program for the future. Almost 4 years later, with many of the support programs sunsetting, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what were some of the lessons, or what are some of the lessons learned which you feel are important to consider moving forward?
You mean out of the COVID experience?
Well, let's put it this way. The COVID programs provided great relief for many Canadians. Yeah. And I guess you could assume that if you had a parallel between the potential of these programs being implemented later on, you could use that as a basis to form another basic income program. So I'm just wondering, from that whole experience, what lessons have we learned?
Well, I think we certainly learned that people made improvements in their lives. Now, I'm not suggesting that a basic income program be designed along similar lines. That was to meet a particular circumstance. It was to get it out the door very fast, which it did. This one can be planned a lot more in a targeted fashion to bring people out of poverty. So I think the lesson learned is that giving people more income security will improve their lives. But one must be very careful to be fiscally responsible about how this is all developed.
People who would be potentially against implementation of such a program, what needs to occur to try to get those people on a more positive direction towards the formation of a basic minimal income? What do you do with these people that are out there and they're just saying, no, we can't do this and we can't give people this and we can't afford this, which is common? What can we do?
I don't think we can afford the way things are now. Poverty is costing us an awful lot of money. I see a study that came out of, I think, the University of Saskatchewan suggests that poverty is costing us about $80 billion a year. Well, that's an awful lot of money. It's wasteful. We need to help people, not put barriers in front of them that they as a result find themselves in considerable stress and anxiety and can't get ahead in life. I'm not suggesting, some people say, well, you're giving people a handout. No, I think we give them a hand up. We give them the opportunity to improve their lives. I think the data that comes forward about the studies in terms of the work ethic are also an indication that people aren't just dropping out of the workforce. They want the MinCom experience, for example, in Manitoba. What it found, the only people that were really dropping out were people that kids that wanted to go back to school, young people that wanted to go back and get a better education and get ahead in life. I think more of those stories, more of that information needs to be out there because I don't believe in the long run this will cost more money at all, and it certainly can be implemented in a very gradual basis. They've decided, the government's decided it wants to implement pharmacare, for example, but it's not going whole hog into it. It's saying, look, we'll start with this more limited measure, but we'll get there eventually. And I think I think we can do that in terms of getting the framework developed and getting into basic income, hopefully in PEI.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor, do you have any comments on a question from Senator Smith?
My question, Mayor,
Just
how do we get the various levels of government together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd like to just briefly speak to your earlier question, if I might. And I agree with everything Senator Eggleton mentioned, but I think I'd like to approach it from a bit more crass perspective. And it's an example of numbers. The city of Victoria has spent over the last few years millions of dollars reacting to poverty-related crises in our cities is typical of most municipalities of any size at all. In fact, I think all municipalities. If we had actually been able to construct a relationship with the provincial government and other not-for-profit agencies to be able to create the supportive housing and supportive services that could have taken those people who are impoverished and placed them in a position where they could help themselves, we would have spent a lot less. And all you need to do is start looking at the actual cost of what municipalities and regions and provinces and the federal government are spending to support people in these fragmented policies and these fragmented programs, and compare the cost of that to something that's more cohesive and coordinated like you're discussing, you will, I believe, just on the numbers, even if you want to put aside the social responsibility aspect of this, the numbers themselves will speak in favor of this type of a framework. On your second question about bringing governments together, I don't believe that there is a way for us to construct any type of a consistent national program unless the three orders of government are at the same table. Okay. And there's aspects of each one of those which can take control. Municipalities can do the direct work. Provincial governments can do, the planning province by province, because each province has to be respected for its unique position. The federal government can be the backstop that says there are certain thresholds that you must meet. There are criteria that every program, no matter what it looks like, must meet so that there's cohesion and there isn't a division amongst the different provinces and the different municipalities so that you choose one over the other because it's better. There has to be consistency. And I think the answer to your question lies right in front of you at your table. If you support this framework with the authority and persuasive capacity that all of you have, you can make this happen. And if you can lead on this, people like me can help you because we can do it from the perspective of what we can do in city by city, what you can do on a national basis.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will now recognize Senator Ross to be followed by Senator Pate and then Senator Lofreda. Senator
Thank
Ross,
you very
please.
much. Thank you very much. And thank you both for your presentations this evening. Very informative. I wonder if you might give me your perspective. Those who participate in a guaranteed income program, do you believe that it would be a transitional program or a permanent program? And in order for it to be transitional, how could people be motivated or incentivized to no longer be on the program? Or would you see it as a permanent program for some?
Well, I certainly from my experience over the years and meeting with people in communities right across the country, and I also had a municipal perspective at one time as the mayor of Toronto for some 11 years. I think most people want to be able to get out of the struggle they're in. Whether they're working poor or whether they're on social assistance, people are disabled. I mean, that's a crying shame for so long. They have been struggling to make ends meet. There's just an epidemic of stress out there. And as people can get out of that situation, then they will do everything they possibly can to move forward in the best way possible for them. Sure, there are going to be people that won't, or people that will take advantage, perhaps abuse the system. But I don't think we design a whole program just based on that. I think we should be designing a program that'll serve the vast majority of people who want to get out of the predicament they're in and who want to become contributors to society. Just think of all that additional support and productivity to our economy that could be made by these people, plus all the savings in terms of the great amount of health care costs and everything. People don't want to be in that state any longer than they have to be. So the sooner we can get a program that gets them out, the better off we'll be in our society. And I think we'll set a good example. We have set examples in other programs. At one time, they would have said Medicare. We can't afford it. It's too expensive. Oh, we got to deal with all these provinces. It will never happen. Well, it did happen. And, child care. For years, it was said, we can't get the provinces to agree with us on child care program. Well, but we have one now. It's not perfect. There's a long way to go in making sure it does work. But let's get moving on this because I think it'll pay dividends.
Senator
If I
Ross?
heard you correctly, yes, thank you.
Please.
If I heard you correctly, what I'm hearing is you think that a program like this should be designed to motivate and incentivize people to be on it for a briefer period.
Absolutely. And I think it will. And I think there is a lot of evidence to that effect in the studies. Even though some of these studies have been short or incomplete and have had different designs on them that produce different kinds of results. Nevertheless, there are some common threads through all of them that indicate that, yes, people will take advantage of the opportunity. If you give them some income security, they'll take advantage of the opportunity and move themselves forward.
Mayor, any comments on the questions from Senator Ross?
Thank you, Senator Ross. I think that practically speaking, that there will always be a very small number of people who, for a variety of very legitimate reasons, can't move on. And that it's our responsibility as a community to ensure that those people are cared for adequately. But I think that Senator Eggleton is correct, that the vast majority of people would see this as being transitional, and there may be even a way to design the program where there are incentives for it to be transitional, and for there to be some limits on whether or not you can do it for an infinite period of time based upon different types of thresholds that are expectations. This is not to be a panacea, in my view. It's to be something which truly is transitional, to take folks who currently cannot get by or see anything further than the day-to-day struggles and crises, to give them that breathing room to be able to see the slightly bigger picture. And I believe when people can glimpse that and see the reality of it, they will move on. The Canadians are a very ambitious people. We have a history of that. And I don't think that's changed. So I think it is reasonable to think it's transitional, that there would be some incentives, but with the recognition that there are a few folks who just may not have the capacity to do more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Ross, please, to be followed by Senator Lofreda. Senator Pate, sorry. Senator Pate, and then to Senator Lofreda.
I'm happy to be confused by... Thank you very much, and thank you again to both Mayor Alto and our former colleague, Senator Eggleton. I wanted to come back to the question that Senator Marshall raised about disincentives to work, because in fact when Professor Green was here and in their BC report, they talk about a basic income not having an appreciable negative impact on the workforce participation. As well, Dr. Jiaying Zhao, who testified, who's doing the cash transfers, is already documenting the very thing that Senator Ross also talked about, which is that by providing a lump sum payment, which is another model, it could be a model that would be incorporated or not, that they're seeing really, really quite quick results. Out of homelessness within 3 months, many of them employed within 12 months. Those are pretty amazing stats for data which we know in the social assistance system is quite the opposite. It keeps people entrenched in poverty and uses negative approaches and moralistic approaches rather than incentives to work, like the Ontario pilot. So I'm curious if either of you have more to add to that. And also, I know that when I first met you, Senator Eggleton, you weren't necessarily a supporter of basic income, and I think it might help some of the folks listening in the public, as well as some of my colleagues, to hear how you moved to that place of supporting basic income, because I know it wasn't always your view. And Mayor Alto, I'd like to hear how you came to this position as well.
Well, I initially, when I teamed up with Hugh Siegel and we did the report through the Social Affairs Committee in from the margins, I said let's be careful of how much we press the basic income, because I'm not sure at this point that is part of the answer. But as I got involved in meeting people from coast to coast as we were doing that work, that study, and the follow-up to it afterwards, I became convinced that really was the way to go, because in terms of either working poor or people on social assistance or people that are disabled, I would see governments that would come forward, provide some additional funds, and then another government would come and more or less take it away or freeze it for a period. So incrementalism in that respect to the current systems was not working. Plus the patchwork of programs and services and the conditions on them just drive people crazy in terms of having to spend so much time trying to comply with all of these things, that, you know, one has to put some trust in people who want to move forward to be able to do that, figure out how to do that best. And I became convinced that it would work better that way than the current system would. So Hugh helped get me started on it, but I am very convinced that this is the only way that we're really going to get out of the poverty that we're in. We still have, yes, we do have the Canada Child Benefit. We do have the seniors programs, which combined are a form of basic income. Hopefully we'll soon have something for people on disability. Yes, we have these, but we still have 3 million people in poverty in this rich country of ours. And I think as part of doing all of that as well, we need to review our income tax system. The last time that was done was the Carter Commission back in the 70s. It's time to do it again.
Thank you, Senator Eggleton. Mayor Alto, comments, please, on the questions from Senator Pate.
Thank you, Senator Pate, for that question. And if I heard it correctly, you were curious about how both Senator Eggleton and I came into this field. For me, it actually came from a different perspective, and it was working with a number of advocacy groups that had nothing to do with this particular topic, but had to do with a variety of different identified groups who themselves were oppressed for a variety of different reasons. And through those particular, in those sectors, the work that often had the most actually spectacular and almost immediate response was when those folks who had faced different types of discrimination for different issues unrelated to income were able to be supported even briefly with micro-lending or rent supplements or programs that allowed them to get a little bit of money that changed their ability to exist within whatever challenges they faced. And looking at the amazing benefit that even that very short term, and as Senator Eggleton described, an incremental type of assistance and the change it made in the ability to move people out of poverty, to move people into a place where they weren't as dramatically affected by the repression, it gave me that sense that if we could do this and have that kind of an impact in a short period of time, often with very small amounts of money, imagine what impact would happen if you could do that in a way which was organized and consistent and certain over a longer period of time, perhaps with a little bit more money. And so for me, it was very much the practical example of how much could happen with so little. And if you imagine that writ larger, what a huge impact that would have on folks who struggle day by day by day. And so that for me was the introduction over a dozen years ago now in trying to advance some interest in this type of a program nationally, provincially, and locally.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. We will now move on to Senator Lofreda, to be followed by la sénatrice Clément and then Senator McAdam. Senator Lofreda, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, and Mr. Eggleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome back. I didn't have the honor or privilege of working with you, but welcome back to the Senate, to our committee this evening. And you had insightful remarks, opening remarks, and you did state in your opening remarks something that resonates with my sentiments. You stated that you would not recommend or legislate a policy that goes beyond the fiscal capacity of government. That's important. Fiscal responsibility is very important if we all want to keep living prosperously. So fiscal capacity has substantially decreased in recent years. Do you believe we still have the fiscal capacity for such a policy today? And I say that because we are discussing farmer care, other policies that already appear to be a priority, despite our current debt levels, which have substantially increased with and since the pandemic. And are we sending the right message by putting together such a framework at this time? And I know it's a framework, but every framework is put together with the intention of one day being adopted. I mean, if it remains a framework, we haven't accomplished anything.
Well, I agree. Framework is only as good as the follow-up and implementation. And we do have a province that has all-party support to be willing to do that. And I think that they, together with the federal government, can design such a program that will work for them. And I think from there, just as Medicare started with just one province, it could then become and should become a national program. So I think we've got to have the will, the political will to do this. We can do it if we can get the governments together to get the framework in place and then to actually implement it. Now, yes, there's the fiscal framework always has to be considered in all of this, and I know that full well. I'm a former member of this committee. I'm a former Treasury Board minister, but I think in the long run, as I said, it'll pay for itself because of the savings in terms of the healthcare and the other things that are costing us more than what they should because of poverty, and in terms of turning people's lives around, getting them in a position where they can advance themselves. Because a lot of people on even the limited pilot projects that were done did get a change of life in their life that was much to their advantage and the advantage of our country.
Question. But we would be one of the first countries to adopt a guaranteed livable income. And given where we are at this point in time, could you provide examples of where else in the world that has been adopted and is successfully ongoing?
Well, there's lots of different designs, and they come from different purposes. One in Brazil, for example, has for quite a number of years proven to be quite successful in attempts to better educate people. But it's all, you do some things for the kids. It also helps the parents, just like the Canada Child Benefit does in this country.
Poverty in Brazil is extremely high.
Oh, yes, it is. But there are different programs that can help make it less than what it is, so in many different places in the world there has been attempts, and they have made a difference. And so we would design ours differently. We wouldn't design it.
But is there anywhere where it is ongoing at this point in time successfully, and not just a pilot project?
I can't name one offhand that continues to be on a permanent basis.
And I'm saying successfully reducing poverty, obviously, and reducing that gap.
Well, but there's successes that have been a number of these projects that have been held, some of them at the municipal level in the United States and different parts of the world. There's the program in Finland. So they've all produced positive results. Would any of them be exactly like the thing that we want to produce here? I think we're going to produce something that's distinctively Canadian, and I think we can make a big difference by doing it.
Thank you. Thank you. Mayor, do you have any comments on that question?
Very briefly, just three quick things. One, Senator Lafredo, thank you for your question. I think actually the identification of the crises that you put forward in your question actually answers the question. In such a situation, I don't think we have any option but to proceed with something that will address what is going to be a much more urgent crisis as we move forward and examine the likelihood of increasing poverty across the country. From my perspective, as the crisis builds, it just dramatically means we have to do more. Secondarily, in the framework itself and in the questions around cost, I think we have to balance out. I agree completely. It has to be something we can afford. But when you start looking at the savings that we get, not just in healthcare, but in policing and emergency services and emergency responses, I think that you could, over a period of time, easily begin to look not at necessarily very much new money, but at the transfer and exchange of money from different programs in a more efficient way. And lastly, I think your question around who else is doing this, Canada has a reputation and a history of leading, and I think this is an area where we can do that, and we should.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senatrice Clément, to be followed by Senator McAdam, and then Senator Dalphon. Senatrice Clément, la parole est à vous.
Merci.
Senator Clément, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair.
Senator, when you talked about institutionalizing poverty, that resonated for me. I'm a legal aid lawyer, and I ran for municipal office when I started representing the clients, the children of the clients that I had at the beginning of my practice. So there's this cycle where you don't break that cycle. It's just families living in this cycle. And so I guess my question is for Mayor Alto, because even though I sit here very honorably and happily as a senator, I do think the municipal level of government is often the most compelling. And so you said in your opening statement, and this speaks to what Senator Smith was talking about, the seeking of consensus, that if you could persuade your residents that this is the right thing to do. So what would you say to your residents? How do you get that social consensus that is clearly lacking here? Because this has taken a long time. Pilots come and go, don't finish.
Yeah. Such an excellent question. Thank you so much for that. And I appreciate the background that you explained from how you got where you are. I think at a local level, at a local government level, there really is an unusual opportunity, as you imply, for us to be able to speak directly to our residents who, as you well know, and principally are the authors of all of the money that we get to do the services that we provide. In the context of the project that I described earlier, the Community Safety and Wellbeing Initiative that's ongoing right now in the city, part of that messaging as it begins to emerge is to be able to provide evidence that the folks who are the most colloquially hard done by are the same people of the folks who have something. People like me who have the privilege of owning a home need to see the individuals who don't as just as viable, just as legitimate, just as equal as any other Victorian from my perspective. And the stories we tell, the data that we have, we're collecting enormous amounts of data as we go through this project so that we can do, as some of your colleagues have asked earlier, we can actually provide the hard numbers that say, these many people will be served by this much money, and we expect, based on the evidence that we have, to have this much outcome. That has to be part of the persuasion. But it also has to be part of the storytelling that we do as well. And I understand that many people feel that that's not as valuable. But in the context of our work with our Indigenous partners, we understand more and more and more about how rich and important those stories are, because they're the stories of people. And if we can get the people who will be impacted by this to tell their own stories to the people who will ultimately pay for it, at least initially, then that coming together of people seeing one another's lives and how they can solve these problems together is so powerful that I believe the people who are paying up front, people like me, through our property taxes, will see the emergence of the people whose lives improve as they begin to be able to actually pay into the same system, as they move through it and become themselves perhaps more economically strong participants in our own community. It's a dialogue, it's a conversation, it's persuasion, yes it is, but it's based primarily on the combination of data, evidence, and the storytelling of people's lives as they change. We listen to one another. We like to listen to one another. If we can continue to keep that open mind, we will see the solution, because the solution is sitting next to us in the chair that's at the table, in the sidewalk where we're sitting on the bench, in the park where we're looking at the beautiful weather that we have here now. These are the people's stories that themselves provide the evidence that is persuasive. And that's what we're trying to do here with this project. And I believe it will work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We will now move to Senator McAdam, to be followed by Senator Dalphon, and then Senator Kingston. Senator McAdam, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you for being here this evening. My first question is to Honourable Eggleton. I'm just wondering, from your experience working in government, from the municipal level to the federal level in many important roles, I'd like you to comment on what the development process set out in Bill 233 would involve. And what would it look like in practice to bring together all levels of government to develop a framework on guaranteed basic income? And I'm thinking of there's many different things like jurisdictional issues and navigating all those issues. Not all provinces get along well together. So there's many issues. So I'd like to get your comments on that.
Well, there are good examples of where the different orders of government can get together. It happened on the child care program. There are the mechanisms for discussions at different levels. One of the things that I remember that worked particularly well with the three orders of government was on a municipal basis, you could determine what the priorities were in the municipality, and get a team together that involve people from all levels of government to work towards the solutions to it. So if there's the will to do it, you can find the formula. You can put together the formula to do it. This bill will help in terms of the federal government taking a lead role, but it needs to bring together, of course, the provinces and the municipalities that can design the kind of program that will do what we want it to do, to get people out of poverty. There has to be a will to do it, though. That's what's important. But there's been will before, so it can be done again.
So do you foresee big challenges? Do you foresee big challenges in getting
Well,
parties
it's obviously going to be a challenge to get all the right data together and to look at a very complex set of programs and services that are intended to help people deal with poverty, to design a better system. So it will take a fair bit of work and should involve all three orders of government in putting it together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, do you have any comments on the questions from Senator McAdam?
Senator, thank you. I think you've hit a really critical question, and I think there's sort of two answers. What you're debating and considering the framework tonight is the mechanism. And so trying to figure out sort of the most general version of that, which allows the greatest flexibility with all orders of government, that's a challenging job, and I don't envy that for you. But once that mechanism is at least scoped in a general sense, I do agree with Senator Eggleton. It really is going to depend on your ability to persuade with your partners, including partners at the provincial and the federal and the municipal levels, to be able to buy into that mechanism, at least to start, and to be able to say, we need to try this. Here's one way forward. Let's try and activate this way forward. And as we move along, we'll make it better and we'll change it as we need to. But the first step, I think, is you deciding whether or not this framework is good enough for you to begin to imagine what that looks like. Because the mechanism part is easy. The next part will be getting everyone to the table to be able to at least begin to believe that there's a possibility of an outcome that works for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sénateur Dalphon, la parole est à vous, s'il vous plaît.
Senator Dalphon, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to ask the question of Senator Eggleton as a former senator and not as a former federal minister or a mayor. So one of the responsibility of the Senate is to protect regions, provinces, and the Constitution. Under our Constitution, all social services are in the jurisdiction of provinces, and the only social program delivered by the federal government is employment insurance after a constitutional amendment which allowed the federal government to do it. What we're proposing here is to replace all provincial social programs by a unique program telling the provinces what to do in their jurisdiction, which is the administration of social services, the services of last resort, services to students, minimum salary, the taxing of benefits and all that. I understand the desire of people to say that there must be a guaranteed minimal income or basic income, but don't you think it's up to the provinces to decide and that we're the wrong form? We've are trying to use the federal parliament to do something that is not a federal jurisdiction and using the Senate that's supposed to represent regions.
Here is an income security measure, not all social programs that are needed to support people in our population, particularly those who are in low income. There still will be all those programs that are by and large delivered by the provinces. The federal government is supportive of many of these, housing, for example. Now, this is something that does involve all three orders of government, and the federal government is in a supportive role there. But what we're talking about in terms of basic income is an income security program, and income security, there's lots of federal involvement in that. There is for seniors, for example. There is the Canada Child Benefit. These are cash programs. These are programs where people are being given money. Now, you still have to work with the provinces on that. the provinces might be quite happy to let the federal government take more control over an income security program, but they'll want to make sure that they are part of the discussion. So those discussions, just like on the healthcare plans, where the federal government is in a supportive role with the provinces. It allocates money through a system of discussions with the provinces, and we'll need to do that in this case too. But income security is really what basic income is about, not the whole realm of social support systems.
Si je comprends bien, vous n'êtes pas en faveur de...
If I understand you, you're not really in favor of the devolution of existing programs.
existing now, because I think the study from the budget officer is really based on the replacement of all the social programs by this kind of universal program.
I don't think so. This cannot replace all the social support programs. We're still going to need housing. We're still going to need childcare. We're still going to need education. And here the different orders of government obviously have to work together, and the implementation is by and large under provincial responsibility, and to a great extent is delivered by municipalities. That would continue. But in this case, we're dealing with an income security program.
Merci, Sénateur Dalphon.
Thank you, Senator Lafont.
To complete the first round, Senator Kingston, la parole est à vous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you both for being here. I'd like to sort of tag on to a lot of what's been said by the other senators. But first of all, my observation has been over time that if you're looking at a program and wondering if it's going to be effective, two of the things you have to think about is it integrated and is it comprehensive? And so integration speaks to, in my mind, taking all the good things that are happening in each of the provinces and across the country, applying a bit of best practice, if you will, to some of that, and looking at, if I'm getting a job, I look at total compensation. I don't just look at sort of what money actually comes into my account, but there's other things. And I see those programs that are in the provinces now, with the help of the federal government very often, being part of that total compensation. For instance, if I'm a single mother and I need a basic income, absolutely. I also need quality childcare in order to be able to do my job and to be able to look to the future of a better career, if you will. That's just an example. Also, to the point of data, there have been things done around the Housing First philosophy. And we do know that savings are being made there, and there's data to support that. The City of Calgary did a wonderful job of keeping data on their Housing First project and the decrease in the number of emergency visits, the decrease in policing costs, the decrease in brushes with the justice system, if you will. And our little city of Fredericton actually replicated that study in a very small project, but they looked at how many people, the people that were in that Housing First program and were supported in their housing, and you spoke to that at first, how over a year, drastic decreases in the number of visits to the emergency room and so on and so forth. So I think what I'd like to ask both of you is, you talk about this, it being, the framework being a living framework. I think that was you,
Yes.
Marianne Alto. And so I'd like your comments on, this is a framework, and in fact in the bill itself it speaks to the other services that will be necessary. So how do we produce something that's not just a check in the mail, but is an integration of a package of programs or a basket of programs that makes a comprehensive support for people that are living in poverty?
So, Senator Eggleton, and then...
I'll let the mayor go first.
Okay. Mayor Alto, please.
That's great. Thank you for that question. Really a critically important one, because I think that we've talked about the framework being something that is supplementary, not in place of. but at the same time, it has to be complementary as well. And so it is going to take some time. If the framework is pursued, and I certainly hope it will be, it is going to take some time to be able to bring together what many of you have referred to before as all the orders of government in some fashion, to be able to say, in British Columbia, for example, and I loved your example of Fredericton, we did something similar in Victoria. In British Columbia, these programs exist and they work pretty well, and this is how we know that. Here's all the data. Now, what's missing maybe for a particular cohort of individuals is this particular income supplement. How do we make sure that in providing that, however that looks, it doesn't detract from all of these other programs on which these people rely for a variety of different things? So there has to be a model for some complementary version of integration that isn't instead of, but is in fact an addition to. Is it going to be easy? Absolutely not. And I don't think anyone is foolish enough to suggest that it is. But it's essential because it can fill those gaps. And it's the gaps themselves that are sort of keeping people right on the edge of not being able to advance their careers, their families, their future. With this little nudge of this potential additional piece, you will complement all of those other programs that you've described in your own community and exist in mine as well, that allow there to be that holistic picture for the single mom with a couple of kids, for the family who has had two breadwinners, both of whom have been laid off for some reason, or all of the other things that we can imagine. It has to go back to something I said earlier. It's concentrated, it's organized, it's complementary, and it's based on what individuals need. Again, not easy. Is that old expression my late mother would say, nothing good ever is. But it's absolutely essential. And so your question, to a certain extent, challenges us to find that way forward, which includes as many governors, many different orders of government as possible, at the same time, not forgetting we're trying to figure out how best to serve people.
Income security is a vital part of the answer, but it isn't the whole answer.
Exactly.
It has to be integrated with all these other things. Child care is very valuable for people to get ahead. If they get a little bit of extra money that helps them with an education, training, get a better job, but they still are going to need child care. They're still going to need affordable, decent housing. So those have to be still key support systems for people in our population. But the scarcity of money in day-to-day living, getting nutritious food on the table and the basic necessities, and the kind of stress that goes with that is a big part of this, and that's why we need a basic income plan. But you can't forget the other support services. You know, you mentioned people for Housing First. There's an example. There's a lot of hard data on that too. There's a lot of hard data that says it costs 3 to 4 times to leave somebody on the street than it is to give them decent housing and support services. These are people, if they're left on the street, they're in and out of emergency wards in hospitals. They're in and out of jail, perhaps. They're certainly in and out of shelter accommodation. And you look, and there are very hard costs in all of that are easily put together and quantified. And the studies indicate that you would save an awful lot of money by having better support services for those homeless people.
Honourable Senators, this concludes basically the time allotted for 233S. And on this, on behalf of the members of the Finance Committee, to both Senator Eggleton and to Mayor Alto, thank you very much for your answering our question. It was very informative, and there's no doubt that if what you've heard and you want to add additional comments, please do it through our clerk. And on this, I say merci beaucoup. Thank you to each of you. Honourable Senators, we will now suspend in order to address our next item of the Finance Committee, which is to look at our draft report, to take into consideration a draft report on our main estimates. On this, we will suspend for 3 minutes.